Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, on Saturday night, January 2026, at 2 a.m. Suddenly the lights of the entire capital go out, and the city falls into complete darkness. This is not an ordinary blackout. A few seconds later, the communications systems, Caracas's power grid, are taken offline. A few seconds later, the light of explosions flashes on and off. Fighter jets take off. The sound of the airbase and the massive Fort Tiuna complex is hit. But this is not just a military attack, it is a precise intelligence operation. The first aircraft, electronic warfare and cyberattacks, have disabled the S-300 air defense systems and Russian-made radars. They have knocked out what was supposed to protect Caracas from the air. At the same time, attack helicopters are seen flying at low altitude. America's Delta Force is delivered to the heart of Fort Tiuna, the military base, where the main residence of Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, is located. The CIA, months earlier, had inserted its human and signal sources even into Maduro's closest protective circle. American spies had monitored all of the president's movements for years, from where he slept, to the type of food, his clothing, and even the condition of his pets, through a small team and an insider source inside the Venezuelan government. Delta Force operators had practiced repeatedly on an exact mock-up of the compound. They even knew which room Maduro used for sleeping and which bathroom he used. At 2:45 a.m., Special Forces fast roped down from the helicopters and, with a controlled blast, opened the entrance. Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, are completely caught off guard. After a brief skirmish, Maduro runs toward the safe room. This is his last chance. He reaches the door. He gets in, but he doesn't have time to shut the heavy steel door. The Americans reach him just seconds earlier. The president of Venezuela, in loungewear, is surrounded in his bedroom. The capture operation is over. At 3:20 a.m., the American helicopter, with a payload that will shake the world, leaves Venezuelan airspace. Maduro is first transferred to the deck of the assault ship USS Sabudagia. Donald Trump releases a photo that carries a clear message: the president of Venezuela is standing with handcuffs and a blindfold. A few hours later, Nicolás Maduro enters U.S. soil as a defendant. Maduro's arrest is met not only with negative reactions from other countries, not only China and Russia, but even European powers. But Donald Trump, in his press conference, in response to criticism of his new strategy, puts on a display and announces that Venezuela will be run with either trust or violation. But the main question is, how did it get to this point? How did the heir of Hugo Chávez's popular, anti-American revolution become a target for one of the boldest military operations in modern history? To answer that question, we have to go back to the roots of this story: flight and slope. The story of Hugo Chávez and the Bolivarian Revolution. If we are to fully understand and analyze such an uprising, we must first get to know Venezuela before getting to know Maduro, a country that, despite having the world's largest oil reserves, was drowning in corruption, inequality, and poverty. A large part of the population lived on the outskirts of the cities and had no share of the nation's wealth. It was in such a rage-filled atmosphere that, in 1992, a young and unknown paratrooper colonel named Hugo Chávez attempted, through a failed coup, to overthrow the government of the time. The coup failed and Chávez was imprisoned. But his brief televised speech, in which he took responsibility for the failure, turned him overnight into a national hero. His voice was the voice of millions of forgotten Venezuelans. After 2 years, Chávez was released from prison, and this time he chose the democratic path. In the 1998 election, with a revolutionary discourse against corruption and U.S. imperialism, he won a decisive victory and launched his Bolivarian Revolution. With the arrival of the 21st century and an unprecedented rise in oil prices on global markets, reaching over $100 per barrel, Venezuela received a windfall. This wealth enabled Chávez to carry out sweeping social programs that were unprecedented in Venezuela's history. With oil money, he built free medical clinics in poor neighborhoods. He provided millions with affordable housing. He sharply reduced illiteracy and introduced generous subsidies for food. At the same time, on the world stage he became one of the most hardline critics of the United States. His famous 2006 speech at the United Nations, in which he called George Bush the devil, symbolized this approach. It made him a symbol of the struggle against U.S. imperialism worldwide. He formed a united front with other left-wing leaders in Latin America and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, then Iran's president. But this revolution had a dark side as well. To consolidate his power, Chávez gradually weakened democratic institutions. He changed the constitution so he could run in elections repeatedly. He tightened his control over the judiciary and the media, and through widespread expropriation of private companies and farms, he made almost the entire economy state-run. These policies secured his popularity in the short term, but in the long term they made Venezuela's economy extremely fragile, fully dependent on a single product: oil. The entire welfare system Chávez had built rested on the shaky pillar of high oil prices. In 2013, as Chávez battled cancer, in his final televised address, with tearful eyes, he asked people that if anything happened to him, they should vote for his successor. Nicolás Maduro was a former bus driver and one of his most loyal allies. A few months later, Hugo Chávez died, leaving his successor a complex legacy, a mix of major social achievements and an economic time bomb. After Chávez's death, Venezuela entered a new phase. Nicolás Maduro, the man now sitting in his late leader's chair, had a completely different story. He was born in 1962 in Caracas, into a working-class family. His father was a labor union leader, and their home was the scene of heated political debates. Maduro never finished high school. In his youth, he worked for a time as the personal bodyguard of one left-wing politician, and then he turned to his main job, driving a bus in Caracas's public transport system. But Maduro was not an ordinary bus driver. With a talent for organizing and networking, he quickly rose within the bus drivers' union and became one of its informal leaders. In those same years, Maduro met his future wife, Cilia Flores, a young lawyer and political activist, someone who later became one of Venezuela's most powerful political figures and Maduro's chief advisor. The turning point in Maduro's life was Hugo Chávez's failed coup attempt in 1992. While many politicians distanced themselves from Chávez, Maduro and Cilia Flores became his most hardline supporters during his imprisonment. They launched a campaign for his release, and this support laid the foundation for a deep friendship between them, turning Maduro into one of Chávez's closest allies. When Chávez became president in 1998, Maduro rapidly rose through the political ranks. In 1999, he was elected to the Constituent Assembly that drafted Venezuela's new constitution. He then entered the National Assembly in 2000 and became its president in 2005. However, Maduro's greatest advancement came in 2006, when Chávez appointed him Minister of Foreign Affairs. Interestingly, Maduro did not even know a single foreign language, yet he served as Venezuela's foreign minister for 6 years. During this period, he pursued Chávez's anti-American policies and established close relationships with controversial world leaders such as Gaddafi, Mugabe, and Ahmadinejad. Throughout these years, he established himself as one of Chávez's most trusted and most ideologically aligned allies. He was not seeking to build an independent power base, but rather to implement Chávez's vision. It was this loyalty that convinced Chávez to choose him as his successor. However, Chávez failed to anticipate one thing: that his loyal successor lacked the most important traits Chávez himself possessed. Maduro had neither Chávez's charisma, nor his rhetorical power, nor his emotional bond with the masses. The only thing he had was Chávez's legacy, which he had to use to preserve power, and it was precisely at this moment that the storm began. The sharp drop in oil prices pushed a country that Chávez had accustomed to heavy spending to the brink of bankruptcy. Chávez had mismanaged the economy with incompetence for years. He had turned the national oil company, once efficient, into a corrupt organization, filled with his supporters. He had increased dependence on oil from 71% in 1998 to 98% in 2013. At the same time, over decades of economic boom, he increased government spending and accumulated massive debts without saving for hard times. When oil prices collapsed, it was disastrous for Maduro's government. To cover the budget deficit, the central bank began printing money. This decision led to hyperinflation and then extreme hyperinflation. The inflation rate reached 69% in 2014, the highest in the world. In 2015, it rose to 181%. But this was only the beginning. In November 2016, Venezuela officially entered a period of hyperinflation. Inflation reached 724% in 2017, 863% in 2018, and 130,060% in 2019. Inflation of 120,000% meant that prices were multiplying every single day. People would go to stores in the morning, and prices would have doubled by evening. Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, became so worthless that people used banknotes to make paper crafts. What happened was one of the largest economic collapses in modern history, in a country that was not at war. Hospitals were left without medicine and equipment. People stood in line for hours to buy bread and milk. Stores had empty shelves. Electricity and water were frequently cut off. Preventable diseases such as malaria and measles became widespread again. One study showed that in 2018, Venezuelans lost an average of 19 kilograms in body weight. In 2021, 95% of the population was living below the poverty line, and 77% in extreme poverty. The result of this situation was one of the largest migration crises in modern history. By 2025, more than 8 million people, nearly a quarter of Venezuela's population, had left the country. However, instead of reforming economic policies, Maduro resorted to repression. When people took to the streets in 2014 to protest, security forces responded with violence. In 2015, the opposition won the elections, but Maduro did not respect the will of the people. The Supreme Court stripped Parliament of its powers, and in 2017 a new Constituent Assembly was convened. The role of the United States and sanctions policy is an important part of this story. In 2015, Barack Obama declared Venezuela an unusual threat to the national security of the United States. During the Trump administration, sanctions were sharply increased and Venezuela's oil exports collapsed. In 2020, Maduro was accused of collaborating with drug traffickers. In the 2024 elections, the announced results were met with widespread protests by the public and the international community. In January 2025, Trump designated Maduro as the leader of a foreign terrorist organization. Tensions peaked in November 2025, and negotiations collapsed. In December 2025, the United States closed Venezuela's airspace and deployed warships. Operation Absolute Will had been planned in silence for months. On Friday night, the operation began, and special forces raided Maduro's residence. Maduro was arrested, and by 3:30 a.m., U.S. forces had left Venezuelan territory. Trump released images of the arrest, and Maduro was transferred to the United States. Trump described this action as part of his new foreign policy doctrine. He emphasized that the United States would assume control of Venezuela's administration until an appropriate transfer of power took place. This is the life story of Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, a man who was arrested in a lightning operation in the middle of the night and taken to the United States.